Okay, good evening. I'm Steve Shields, a Vice President of the Royal Asiatic Society, Korea. On behalf of Brother Anthony, our President, welcome to our 1,424th lecture since 1900, marking the midpoint of our 120th year. Yes, I've been back through all the records and counted how many lecture programs we've had, probably because I don't have enough to do during Corona. The RAS wants to thank our generous sponsor, Asia Development Foundation, for their second year of support. We are delighted to have Joey Rositano with us as our lecturer. Originally from Nashville, Tennessee, Joey came to Korea in 2006. He's joining us tonight from Jeju, where he has lived for several years. He's spent the past 10 years studying shamanism and has become a leading expert on the sea women, or Haenyeo, of Jeju. Joey's new book, Jeju Island's Haenyeo, A User's Manual, is available for Kindle on Amazon. After Joey's lecture, there will be time for questions. So if you will now please make sure your mics are muted to reduce background noise, we will hear from Joey.
All right, hello everybody. Yeah, here I am on Zoom from Jeju. It's nice and rainy, pretty humid out. Well, I think it's cleared up a bit. First of all, I will, kind of refute the designation as a expert on the Haenyeo. I have done a book on the Haenyeo recently, but I've studied shamanism on Jeju for the last 10 years. And this book on the Haenyeo kind of came out of a situation where I thought that the Haenyeo were getting so much worldwide attention and coverage, but they weren't necessarily getting, a fair representation as far as it went from their own perspective. And the reason that I knew a lot about the Haenyeo's personal perspective is because for the last years, informally and formally, doing research and just kind of kicking around the island, I've had conversations with the Haenyeo for 10 years now. And I've kind of, before they kind of became UNESCO sponsored and so famous, and known worldwide through, the photography projects and the novels that have been written about them and the other projects. I heard a lot about their kind of personal attitudes towards, transitioning to that period where tourism was increasing on Jeju and where they were becoming kind of a symbol of the island. And kind of their inside perspective was a lot different than the way that they were shown to be from the outside. So what I've done is I've done a book that has, I think there are 12 interviews with 3 generations of women divers. The generation from 60s to 80s, and then the next generation, 40s and 50s, and then the children of the divers and grandchildren of the divers that have either chosen to continue being divers or have chosen other life paths. So what I've got for you today, I'm just going to kind of lead you through the content of my book. And the first section here is just kind of an introduction to some of the culture of the divers. And then after that, I want to go through some quotes from my book, and then I'll play a reading. If we have time, I'll play a reading of one of the essays. And I guess the chat's open. So as we go along, if you guys want to type some questions in or some comments in, I can respond to those comments. I don't really have the structure of this is kind of all over the place. So I'm just gonna, throw it out there, just kind of piecemeal, and hopefully we can have a conversation about the project. So, and the project now is an ebook on Amazon.com, but it's not actually finished. It's missing 3 interviews, which are more going to be from the perspective of women divers who become leaders in their communities. So there's one more chapter on a woman diver who ended up becoming the mayor of her town and bringing windmills. She was kind of integral into the process of bringing windmills to her village. and then a couple other women that might have a bit different perspective than the women in this book do. My friend's been calling this book A People's History of Women Divers. So maybe my politics are showing through a bit there, but I have to say, you know, this kind of environmental, environmental activism and, critique of gentrification, that type of thing. I really didn't find any women divers that held a different perspective. They're all very skeptical of how, you know, they're going to end up benefiting from tourism and from, all the development that's happening in Jeju. So the interviews in this book are pretty fair, I think. And I'm desperately searching for women divers who have a different perspective, but it's hard to find, as far as that type of thing goes, it's hard to find the opposite perspective. As far as all the other topics that I talk to them about, you'll find a variety of personalities and a variety of stances and experiences. So there's not really, I wasn't trying to make like, to shape the narrative other than that kind of political, like let's look through the tourism, let's look into the structure of what gentrification is doing. Other than that, these other type of things, I just kind of let the women speak and say what they wanted to say. I've spoken with women divers, before I did these interviews, probably kind of informally for 8 years. So a lot of the stories from the essays are things that I just heard along the way, just stories that I kind of got into when I got into the villages and just interesting things I heard about. And from my own curiosity, I wanted to learn more. Okay, so let me try to share this PowerPoint. Let's see how to do this. Okay, share screen. Okay, are you guys seeing a PowerPoint or are you seeing my face?
We're up. Your PowerPoint's up.
Okay, good deal. Okay, Jeju Island's Haenyeo, a user's manual. Okay, this is kind of the intro to the book. I'll just read the first couple of paragraphs here. Ever since Jeju Island has forged its way onto the international tourism scene, its women freedivers called Haenyeo have taken center stage as both cultural symbol and tourist attraction. The divers' fame peaked with their designation as intangible cultural heritage by UNESCO in 2016. The honor garnered worldwide attention for the incredible grandmothers of the sea. But what do these women of newfound international fame, who speak an endangered language and practice an ancient freediving lifestyle, have to say about their own popularity? What is the current situation for the Haenyeo really like from their point of view? And you guys can kind of examine the rest of this later. It's on the Amazon page there, just the book description. Okay, who am I? I'm Joey Rositano. I'm from Nashville, Tennessee. I've lived in Jeju for I think 13 or 14 years. I don't go to Seoul much. If I'm in Korea, I'm pretty much in Jeju. This was kind of my Korean hometown. The rest of the country is a little bit foreign to me. I'm very much adapted to the way that people speak in Jeju and the culture here. I take trips to Seoul or around the country or outside of the country now and then. I work at the local college, teaching kind of IELTS testing and conversation classes. I'm not an academic, but I've been doing research and kind of producing documentaries and projects, especially about shamanism for the last 10 years. So that's something I gradually got into, but that's another story. So I can talk about it another time, or if you guys have questions later. Okay, so I want to start with some facts about the Haenyeo. These aren't they're in no particular order. So I'm just going to throw them out here. So, okay, so the first one here, tradition dates back to around 434 AD. Those are the first records anyway. But no one really knows when this tradition started. And of course, it wasn't only the women diving back then, it was the men diving as well. And, you know, I've got fat and protein are easier to capture from an ancient sea than hunting or trapping. We have to think that you know, the sea even 50 years ago was much different than our sea today. You know, there was, it's pretty easy in Jeju to go into the water with a spear. I've done it myself, and come out with a fish 10 minutes later. It's very easy to do that. It's very easy to get, you know, protein, I think, and fat from the sea, a lot easier than hunting on land. So, you know, there are divers in Taiwan, there are divers in Eastern Russia, there are divers in Japan, of course. I think that, you know, down into Africa and Southeast Asia, in some areas it's the men that dive, in some areas it's the women that dive. I think that this is probably something that human beings have carried on, like it was a life way for many, you know, thousands of years. And Jeju is just one of those areas where it still remains, probably because of Jeju's isolation and, you know, the history with colonization and the kind of price hikes for seafood from Korea in that time. Okay, so in the early 70s, there were around 35,000 divers. There are around 4,000 now. So most of the divers are 50 or above. A good portion of them are in their, you know, 60s and 70s. Still, most local people, even in Jeju City, have divers in their families or relatives who were divers at some point in their lives. As in the 70s, it was somewhere around a tenth of the population on the island. Okay, so since so many of the island dove, you know, just in recent decades, if you live on Jeju, most of the people you know will have a connection to women divers in their families. It's not rare at all. Most people have at least one grandmother who's a woman diver. The next point here, men used to dive and still do on a limited number of islands off of Chuja-do. And the researcher at Jeju National University, Go Kwang-min, has investigated these islands and write about them. So Go Kwang-min, he set out to figure out, you know, exactly why the men stopped diving and why they kept diving in certain areas. And I'm not really sure what his conclusions were, but I know that he you know, covered that topic, although it's still a bit of a mystery, and I know there's debate about it. So Haejang Cho did a study of Udo in 1979, a very famous study, of course, on the sexual division of labor in the most traditional village she could find, which was one of the villages on, it's actually the village that the woman on the front cover of my book lives in on Udo Island. And she notes that men used to dive, but were prohibited to do so when Confucianism was brought and intensified on Jeju. The arrangements she describes are something I can see many aspects of in couples I know personally on Jeju Island. So this couples who aren't involved in fishing or diving. Though, so this is something, if you live on Jeju Island, you'll definitely notice, is that there's an awful, you know, as Cho described in her famous study on Udo Island, which was the most intense version of this on the island, you know, the women took kind of the primary role as far as like the breadwinners for the family. And the men were often housekeepers or did a little farming on the side, and they often took care of children. And this is something you'll still see on Jeju Island with men who have nothing to do with fishing and aren't from fishing villages, is that they're very tender with small children. And you'll see a lot of men still taking care of small children, especially elderly men. And it's also the case, I don't know the statistics on this, maybe they're not significant, but I think anyone who lives in Jeju would know just from walking around, it's really amazing how many businesses are run by women still. I've seen many cases of this where, you know, even people who have nothing to do with diving, who live in the inland villages as well, where the woman is the main breadwinner and where the men are kind of playing a more supportive role. So there is that reality. It's shifted a lot. I mean, Jeju's a lot like mainland Korea now, but there's some remnants of that kind of culture still. Okay, so the origins of why men stop diving, I believe, is a bit disputed. She gets into the importance of Confucian rites and the role men play in performing them and caring for children. Okay, yes, so shamanism, which is what I study, and Confucianism are very important on Jeju, but the Confucianism is not the Confucianism that you would find on the mainland. It's very much infused with, shamanic practices. And that's something that is very striking to mainland Koreans when they come to Jeju. All right, so the next point I have, the Haenyeo have had a long fight against national tariffs and taxes on their work, and even today must do battle with price setters. Their work is also very territorial and competitive. Thus, divers have a great ability to fight and argue, but can also skillfully reach settlements to disputes quickly, which is aided by an almost anarchistic local government system within their villages. Diver communities have long set their own rules through their collective diving associations and police their own diving activities by assigning special monitors in certain villages to make sure divers are following the seasonal restrictions for catching certain food. This is something I thought about recently in America with this kind of this Chaz and Chop and these kind of like these declarations of these kind of maybe kind of anarchistic collectives and occupations of neighborhoods. You know, someone should do that work on Jeju's villages. It's really amazing. I mean, the central government here and planners in recent decades have done everything they can to kind of wrench the power from like the local villages and the village leaders, to the extent where culturally Jeju is divided between East and West. But about a decade ago, they split the island into North and South, and they kind of centralized the power between the main two cities, Jeju City and Sagipo. And that definitely was a movement that kind of disempowered locals to, protest and stop a lot of these big developments that are unwanted in their villages that are coming in now. I mean, they consulted American, economic hitmen type, I guess, or whatever you want to call them. But this was a very deliberate action on their part. I think my buddy Tommy Tran has written about that a bit, but a researcher at UCLA. Okay, on the next point here, on the tendency to fight. Okay, yes, you will see many fights in Jeju's villages. You will see the sweetest, kind of characters erupt into disputes and things like this. And to outsiders, it looks very intense, but they're able to turn up the heat very quickly, and then they're able to turn it off very quickly. And I believe this is a cultural thing as well. In my time on Jeju, I've seen a number of conflicts taken on by the Haenyeo. I've also seen them organize to oppose a tourist hotel development, a naval base in Gangjung village. Presently, there are several struggles going on, including an occupation of the provincial government building by the Haenyeo and their allies against the proposed second airport. I've seen them physically take on tourist diving operators from the mainland, where they threw the divers' equipment into the sea, and some of these battles of which you can read in my book. So a lot of times these kind of these struggles between, people with agendas from the mainland or from the central government here in the Haenyeo erupt in violent situations. There's an occupation at the provincial building that's been going on 2 years now. It's really amazing. There's a tent city there, and at first it was the women divers and farmers from these 5 villages that were opposing the second airport project on Jeju. And now it's the Jeju Green Party and other kind of interested people who keep the occupation. And sometimes there are women divers living there, but usually the younger people will kind of hold their places, and they'll come in on weekends or on off days when they're not working. They've kept it up during coronavirus even. So, there have been concerns about that. Elderly women gathering together, in that situation. Luckily, we haven't had too many cases here. Okay, moving on. Next point, while adept at handling disputes, Haenyeo are generally very sweet and have been as curious about me as I was about them during my research. But also in the many years of casually talking to them, most have been very willing and proud to help me document the shamanic village myths I've made extensive records of. And then and this was for a new project to address issues with the commercialization of the island and their image. Okay, yeah, so I didn't find very much resistance to these new interviews and what I wanted to do with them. Most of the women divers were very happy to talk to me about these issues. And, this is kind of a hidden side of what's going on in Jeju. And, a lot of women, these women are really suffering in ways. Some have benefited, but, to a large extent, they feel like some of their issues are being ignored. And it's not just the airport villages, it's spread all over the island. It's, there are different issues all over the island. So there are 2 or 3 areas that are having issues with pollution, runoff from the hotels and such things. And it's so intense that there start to be issues with like skin conditions and large die-offs of the sea life there, which you can read about in the interviews. Okay, Haenyeo, a user's manual. The name is taken, this is about the book, from French writer Georges Perec's Life, a User's Manual. It's a book that goes behind the structure propping up tourism and the capitalization of women divers' image to allow them to address in their own words the number of issues they are facing and in what is quite possibly their last decade. So there are a few essays as well, which I wrote with the intention of portraying the environment of a village and the interviews themselves, that the interviews themselves couldn't encompass. The portrait of a whole village, or how the legacy of war, the forced divisions, the anti-superstition movements, and shamanism plays in the village. Yeah, so yeah, Jeju is a traumatized community because of, I don't know how familiar you guys are with, the April 3rd incident and the massacres that happened on Jeju Island. But most of these women have family members that suffered. And if they're old enough, they were either teenagers during the time or in their 20s when that struggle occurred. And there's a lot of trauma and there's a lot of issues that kind of remain on the island because of that. So that's something that affects the personalities of the women as well. Okay, moving on. During Japanese colonization, the economy started to spike for the Haenyeo. Jeju researcher Go Kwang-min also writes about this in his book on Jeju traditional lifestyles. And though there was a lot of abuse of the Haenyeo when they worked abroad in Japan by their managers and contractors, they did manage to begin to be the breadwinners of their households. Go points out that it was the price hikes in seaweed during the colonial period which funneled money to Jeju's villages. And this is also where the money came from that allowed divers to send their sons to university, mostly in Japan, who returned to Jeju to lead the rebellion after the war, which played a part in leading to the events of the 1948 uprising. So it kind of, at that time, a new educated class of people formed, and a lot of these, the women divers were, kind of an economic powerhouse at the time. So they were able to, they were kind of the first to be, other than the old upper class of Jeju, to kind of encourage their children and send their children to school abroad. And yeah, that's something that's still going on. After this period, the women kept paying the tuition of their children and grandchildren. Even today, you will meet divers. And this is an inspiring thing, to be on a boat of divers who brag about all the fancy universities their children attend all over the world. I often ask my friends if their grandmothers could help pay for their education or the launch of a new business if they are at a loss for options. It's not a strange question on Jeju. You'll meet husbands and grandchildren in my interviews whose educational expenses were paid for by women divers. Okay, so yeah, in my book, there's a couple, and they're in their late 70s, and the lady is a woman diver, and her husband was a local high school teacher. And I mean, she paid for his education. And that's kind of like, grandmother's money is kind of a resource for young people on Jeju. That's an option, to help funding a project or a new business or purchasing a house or what have you. The next point, women divers are a lot of fun, and to watch what they do is really amazing. They aren't Amazonian women, and for the most part, they seem to really enjoy their work. Many are addicted to it, and this, in my opinion, might be an actual physical addiction, especially in the days before modern wetsuits, but that's for another day, and I'll get ahead of myself. Some elderly divers dive for the enjoyment of doing so and not for the money. Yeah, there's a lot of representation of women divers struggling and the hardships, and they have a lot of diving related health issues, and they're elderly after all. But to be in a group of women divers, a lot of the time you'll notice that they're having a really good time, and not a single one from my book said that they didn't enjoy diving. They actually said that it was one way that they were able to be with their friends. It was a way to socialize. And there are divers that still need to dive for the money, and then there are divers that don't. So those divers that don't, they believe that it's a healthy thing to do, to keep working, and it's something for their own happiness to be able to socialize with their friends. Yeah, so young divers generally work to provide a main source of income for their families, along with farming. Every diver that I interviewed asked me to tell the English-speaking world that they are happy people. They are happy that people respect their work, but to say that they are, above all, normal women doing a job. And every single one said that. That was the main message when I asked them, what do you want to tell the world? We're not super women, we're normal women. But they're pretty super though. They're pretty super. If you, they're doing something extraordinary. And like I said, I think it's something that lots of people did from many communities all around the world. I think this just in our modern era happens to be a kind of holdout. It is, of course, an incredible job. Okay. The next point is about when I first came to Jeju. When I first came to Jeju, I saw a woman diver. When I first came to Jeju, I flew to Jeju with just a day or two's notice. I was living in Spain, and I didn't really plan to come to Korea. I knew nothing about Korea. So, and I decided not to look up anything before I came as well, because I just had an invitation to come. So I got on a plane and I came to Jeju. So within the first couple of weeks, I was on a bus, I think. That's why I put if my memory serves me. And I recall seeing a woman come out of the ocean in a diving suit with her husband, helping her to carry seaweed. So I actually wrote down in my notebook the name of the closest business I could see, because I thought there was this really eccentric couple that were wearing wetsuits and kind of gathering seaweed from the water. I didn't know that it was a normal thing that people did for a profession on the island. And yeah, well, I mean, the women divers weren't as advertised, 14 years ago as they are now. So even though it was kind of my experiment to come without knowing where in the world I was going, it could have been possible to come to Jeju and not know that they existed. But yeah, I thought they were just an interesting group of people that I wanted to meet. But then it turned out it was a substantial part of the culture. The next point, I didn't want to do a book on their divers, because starting 4 or 5 years ago, funding was going around and everyone was doing projects on the divers. In a roundabout way, I did do projects on the divers back then, because I suggested 2 project ideas to friends, a fashion book on granny fashions, which has come out, and a series of large-scale portraits that were brought to fruition by another friend. So even though I didn't want to follow the crowd, I guess my mark is there somewhere. As far as the fashion goes, Jeju's Haenyeo do accessorize. Sometimes they decorate their floats with floral patterns, and they tailor their suits with similar patterns. Some wear protective bracelets, charms, and nowadays, if they're going to be interviewed for TV, they will do their hair, etc. all of the women divers also told me they hate to be, you know, photographed while they're working, you know, sweating, and it's kind of an awkward thing for them to see. You know, in the case of one of my friend's mothers, you know, her portrait went around the world in museums, and it was like, I think it was like 30 feet high or something like that. So this woman saw, you know, in her work clothes, this big portrait of her that was, you know, 30 feet high in the local museum. And you know, this is, it's kind of they've never wanted to be shown in that state. They want to be shown when they're wearing their proper dress clothes and stuff like that. So that's something that they've had to adjust to. And some women divers get really angry about being photographed. The next point here, there are lots of trinkets for sale on Jeju now featuring the Haenyeo, and lots of art featuring their image. Some divers I've talked to like the items and think they are cute, while others are frustrated that they don't benefit financially from the sale of these things. Some of the art is to the diver's taste, but there are also big fails in this. For instance, there were a set of murals featuring the lyrics to a traditional diving song, which tales of, that should be T-E-L-L-S, tales of a woman diver diving at sea on a wall, right where the Haenyeo went into the water. Okay, so this was the situation in this village, Gimnyang, and I guess some artists had been hired from the mainland to do murals in the village, but right at the kind of right in the area of the sea where the women would kind of line up to get in the sea in the morning, someone had painted a mural that had the lyrics to a traditional dirge about a woman diving at sea. And apparently it was really, and they'd done it in Jeju dialect and anything, you know, so, and everything. So apparently it was kind of creeping out the women as they went in the water to see this kind of funerary song, you know, on the wall right where they were entering the water. So sometimes there's this, you know, lack of cultural communication going on that backfires a bit. All right, speaking of songs, okay, traditional women divers sang rowing songs when they went out in their boats on longer voyages, especially. But today, most divers would see the songs as cultural relics, though there are many women divers who can sing them still. Mikhail Karikis, you guys might know this guy, has done an interesting film on this and other projects on other work song traditions in the world. The lyrics are really interesting from these songs. I think there's a collection of the songs available somewhere, and they give insight into the Haenyeo's collective experience. Okay, let's see, next, the reason I decided to do Haenyeo a user's manual was because over many years of watching these projects come out, many projects were funded by the provincial government during the preparation for UNESCO sponsorship, and almost none of them, and I said here, I believe it might be okay to say none of them. Actually, no, I thought of one of them. There was a photography project about the kind of city beach here in Jeju, and it kind of showed the women kind of dealing with the you know, the pollution in the water there, and the kind of just facing kind of the neighborhood converting into a tourism-based economy as opposed to a fishing-based economy. I can't remember that fellow's name, but yeah, there was one project, but there's been hundreds of projects about the divers. And there weren't many projects. There was that one project that I know of that really delved into the challenges of gentrification and environmental decline affecting the divers. And not only this, but a number of land grabs and the desecration and removal of their precious shamanic shrines, which was, of course, the thing that I was looking into the most, all the while using their image to drive tourism. And much of the time, they saw no returns from these ventures or the smaller ventures run by back-to-lander types or others from elsewhere in Korea who relocated to Jeju to buy coastal properties. I wanted there to be a record of these phenomenon, which for local Jeju people would be the main thing going on here in this era. And I'm not quite done. I'll add a few interviews in the updated version. So yeah, I really, like I said, I came to Jeju first. That's where I know in Korea. And it was important to me to show from their perspective these big changes that are happening in Korea, or in Jeju, how they actually feel about it, because a lot of that doesn't get transmitted. Let's see. Okay, so the book for the moment is a self-published book, as it started as a collection of blog posts. Okay, yeah, so this started on pagansweare.com, which is my blog. And I started covering all the villages where shamanic shrines were being destroyed, and I wanted to document those. And I was kind of the first locally to document situations such as, you know, there was a village called Yere village where a hotel complex came in from Malaysia, and one of the women divers, the UNESCO sponsored Yeongdung ritual, the shrine at which they do this UNESCO sponsored ritual was destroyed for this hotel complex. No one had consulted the divers about it. A kilometer or two from Sunrise Peak in Sungsan village, there are 3 shamanic shrines that were destroyed just a half a kilometer from the UNESCO protected land and property. And the women divers were never consulted about that, and they were told to shut up. So that situation is covered in the last interview of this book. Okay, so I think I've got a couple more points. Here's some basic things. These are women divers. Sorry I didn't include more photographs. I was kind of against taking photographs of women divers because, you know, they're so kind of overwhelmed with people taking photographs of them now that it was a, you know, it was a bit of a benefit in my own image to not have a camera and not take pictures. But I did go on the boat and take pictures a couple times. And in the situation where shamanic ceremonies are happening, plenty of pictures, but of course they're not in their diving gear. So these are two, this is a mother and daughter getting ready to dive for, I can't remember what for. I think they were diving for sea slugs maybe this day, I'm not sure, but something specialty. And so I snapped this picture from a boat. So here's some basic things. The Haenyeo start diving when they're very young. It's usually gradual. It starts with play by the beachfronts and starts turning into diving. That's what all the literature says about it. You know, everything. But it's true. They all tell you that around 5 or 6 years old, they start playing around the water, and then they kind of gradually begin diving without even knowing they're doing it. It's you know, they're kind of going in the water more and more the older they get. Then around puberty, actual training starts. By the time they are 20, they are full-fledged divers. Most divers are in their 50s, 60s, and up into their 80s. They generally dive around 3 hours, going up and down constantly with a few breaks. Each dive can last 30 seconds or up to 2 minutes. That's not very long to hold your breath for free diving. You know, the Greek stone divers were talking like 20 minutes, right? 10, 15 minutes. You know, this is actually, but the catch here is that they do it consistently over 3 hour period, up and down, up and down. It's absolutely amazing. They have a lot of stamina. Some younger divers stay in the water longer. They have a specialized breathing technique. Yeah, I've kind of been looking into this breathing technique a lot, but I won't talk about it here because it's a long story. And they gather shellfish, top shell, conch, abalone, octopus, various types of seaweed. Seaweed is for food, dietary supplements, and a gunpowder element during the wars. And it has other industrial uses, fertilizer as well. Sometimes they spear fish. Yeah, so the women divers of Korea were supplying the Japanese military at some points in history with this whatever element comes out of seaweed, which I'm not that familiar with the particulars of that. Okay, just about done here with my points. Haenyeo form mental maps of underwater seascapes. This is really interesting. And the rocks and parts of each village beach has their own names and often mythology to go with the rocks that have unique formations. They learn the details of every part of the ocean and know where all the underwater features are, and they can point them out from the shore at high tide. So if you ever meet women divers, a really interesting thing to ask them is to explain to you their beach. And they'll probably say like, you know, it's water, it's a beach. And you're like, no, no, no. I mean, what is the geography, the underwater geography? You know, in every kind of significant area of the beach and every large submerged stone has its own name. Just like in inland Jeju, every single field in a Jeju village has its own name, and often a story or some type of mythology associated with it. And it's the same with the underwater landscape. And a lot of women divers have personal experiences, and the anchor point for those personal experiences can be that particular feature underwater. So, you know, they could kind of relate to you, you know, something significant that happened to them, where, at what time, like seeing something very strange in the water at some point, or having a near-death experience, or some type of accident, or whatever, or kind of a mythological story. The seafloor is often seen as a field, and diving is seen to be farming of the ocean. And the symbolism and myths and types of sympathetic magic and divination during shamanic ceremonies show this. Farming deities are sometimes even related to Haenyeo work in the Yeongdeung ceremony, which is a significant ceremony welcoming the Yeongdeung gods. They have it on the mainland as well, to Jeju, the kind of gods that plant, you know, the sea life. They very much see it as like a field being fertilized to produce new life. These deities are seen as seeding the ocean floor with a young sea life. And there's a photo I was going to show you, but it's not here. So it was a photograph of part of a shamanic ceremony where there's kind of a map of the sea floor laid out on the ground, and the shaman is telling the women divers where the fishing is going to be good for that part of the year. But I could not find it in time, so sorry to not have that available for everybody. Okay, and the last point is about religion. So Haenyeo may practice Christianity, but most are shamanic and Buddhist, and practice Chesa, which is led by the men, but mixed with shamanic aspects. This is very serious on Jeju, and a priority in island villages. Many divers are women of great faith. Yeah, I call some of, you know, when I go to a Jeju village and I'm researching shamanism, I'm looking for what I call like the shamanic holy rollers. And it is, I'm from Nashville, Tennessee, you know, a place that has some pretty wild sects of Protestant Christianity. And it has some really, you know, I'm familiar with people who are really charged by their religion. And some of the women divers in the villages are, you know, very much those types of people. And I'm familiar with that kind of, you know, with that possible aspect that people can have about their personalities, for sure. Okay, so here's a couple photographs. This is one of the women that I interviewed. She's the woman diver on Jeju who's leading the fight against the second airport. So she's the main organizer of women divers in five different villages. So if the second airport comes into Jeju, right off the bat, you're probably going to lose 300 or 400. This is, I don't know, you guys probably aren't familiar with this issue, but it's probably the biggest issue on Jeju Island right now. About maybe 4 years ago, it was announced that a second airport was going to be built on the south side of the island to give access to Sungsan, the kind of UNESCO natural like sponsored part of the island. And you know, the majority of islanders are against it, and definitely the 5 or 6 villages that will be kind of taken over by this project have been, yeah, you wouldn't believe it. I mean, they have occupied the provincial building here. And like I said, the divers were first, and this lady had a lot to do with that. So, I'll get to some quotes by her in a second. I was talking before about the trauma that people have faced on Jeju Island, and I wanted to I wanted to show this picture. This is a picture of school children playing on a playground in Bukchon village in Jeju, on kind of the north side of Jeju near Hamdok Beach, if you've been to Jeju before, one of the main tourist beaches. And this, you know, on this very schoolyard, this is where one of the biggest kind of incidents during the April 3rd massacres happened. And I think 300 or 400 people died here. And just beside their grandparents' graves, this kind of mass grave that's just in the field beside the school, are the grandchildren and great-grandchildren of the victims of these massacres who are playing here. So yeah, I did a little project where there's kind of this, you know, of course, the women divers and the elderly people are suffering from the direct trauma of what happened back then, but there's also kind of a generational trauma going on, and each generation deals with it in its own way. But this was interesting to me because these in the kind of children's society of Jeju, there's also kind of a way through rumors and storytelling that the children track and kind of convey the events of the 4/3 uprising, where 30,000 people were, if you guys know the story, were killed by national, you know, police and like the central powers, by national forces, and most of them innocent villagers who had no idea that what was about to happen to them, or weren't directly involved in the rebellion. And these kids kind of have a culture where they kind of tell stories, almost like ghost stories and little anecdotes and stuff. So I actually have some drawings made by children, and they've drawn where they believe the graves to be located underneath their school. There actually aren't graves located directly underneath the school, but there are graves nearby. So it's really interesting that the kids kind of have, and this is something I've observed without initiating it. I've just heard them, when I've taught kids in Jeju, I've heard them kind of talking to each other about the massacre. Or once I was in class and the kids were, they were saying, it's 4/3, it's 4/3, it's 4/3. And there was kind of an uproar. And I said, what are you guys talking about, you know? And they said, we didn't get to eat lunch today because something was wrong in the cafeteria and we're all starving. So it's 4/3. So it's kind of, you know, they have like these little jokes or these kind of like this culture of their own where they kind of process the trauma. And of course, there's a lot of workshops and stuff for them on the island that help them you know, that educate them and teach them how to deal with these things. So that's something to keep in mind if you're ever, you know, interacting with doing research in Jeju. You know, that's the most significant thing that kind of happened historically in their lives. So here's just a couple pictures from the research I normally do. You know, Jeju village shamans. On the left is Grandma O. She's the kind of head shaman of Sewa village. She died a couple years ago, but she was the oldest shaman. She was, I think, 95 maybe when she passed away. And she was retired, so she was really kind to me and kind of brought me in and taught me a lot about Jeju mythology. On the right hand are her two students. So this is the present head shaman who's being dressed in the traditional sacrifice cloth here, and then her student, who's actually from the mainland, but has learned Jeju shamanism, which is not an easy thing to do. Here are a couple women divers from Udo Island that I interviewed, and had a really good time interviewing them. Their interview is in the book. This is a picture I took that I thought represented my book very well. It's a statue of a woman diver and a tourist taking a selfie in front of the statue. So yeah, okay. And this is a documentary, if you're interested in shamanism on Jeju Island, that I did a couple years ago about about, this is the first part of it, the story of Jeju Island shamanic shrines, where this is mostly the inland villages, not the women divers, but this is kind of a tale of the culture of worshiping trees at tree shrines in Jeju and shamanic practices. So let's see, how are we doing for time? It's 8:19. Okay. I can't see, are people making, are they making comments and stuff? I can't see, I don't have anywhere that.
There's one question about asking if you did the interviews in Korean.
Yeah, I did them in Korean, and my Jeju dialect is very broken, eh? So, I mean, I understand Jeju dialect, but I don't speak well, but yeah. I only will have someone go with me to do interviews if it's a particular situation where for example, when I went to meet the leader of the airport protest, I went with a translator because just the technical details of, the history of the protest and their strategy as far as opposing the airport and stuff like that. I was worried I would miss some details. And also for rapport, I've never met that woman before. So a lot of these people that I interviewed were long-term friends or acquaintances or grandparents of someone I know. In a situation where I don't know the person that well, I may go with someone, just a Korean person, just to try to, dispel any suspicion about my purposes, So, but usually it's not a problem. And so here, these are the, I think the time's getting pretty late here. So I'm just gonna go over the contents of my book here, and just kind of tell you who these people are. So it's broken into sections: interviews and essays. The first interview, Kyungjin Park, is a young diver in her 40s. So this is very much someone that I'll drink beer with, and normal woman who's of her generation, and her job happens to be woman diver. And someone her age doesn't speak much Jeju dialect. Well, they do, but I mean, they're not really of that generation. They're more of the generation that has cultural access to mainland Korea. She had worked in Seoul, she'd done other jobs, she went back to diving because it made sense. She told me to work 3 hours a day with young children versus working 8 hours a day for less pay. Next is a conversation with artists. These are granddaughters of divers who do annual kind of arts exhibitions about the goddesses of Jeju, about the mythology and goddesses. Next is an essay, The Diver Who Tried to Die at Sea. This is an essay about a woman in her 80s who wanted to, she kind of toyed, well, she dove into her late years much more so than longer than her family thought she should dive, because there was this arrangement on Jeju, policy on Jeju, where if a diver that died at sea, the families would get a better stipend than a diver who just simply retired. So this essay is about, in this village near Jeju City, it's about the family trying to coerce this elderly diver to stop diving, and her refusing to do so, which she did refuse to do so, and has refused to do so since. Interview Udo Island divers, those two ladies I showed you a picture of before, these ladies from Udo. Young Kim, she's a sociologist who specializes in gentrification, and has done work on the gentrification of Woljang village in Jeju, where 85% of the beachfront property is now owned by outsiders. And she wrote about, she did her master's degree on that topic. she's not the granddaughter of a diver, but her grandfather is actually the harbor master, which is, you know, an important position in a village, Jeju village. Kyung Han is an activist diver. She's the lady here leading the rebellion against the airport. Let's see, essay, Jeong, Destroyer of Islands. This is kind of about an artist, daughter of a diver, and it's kind of about generational trauma, I think, and the trauma she has inherited from her mother. Bile Bile, Beach of Death. This is about, well, I might, if we have time, I may play you guys an excerpt. I don't think we'll have time though, but maybe I'll post this. I've got an excerpt of a reading of this one, but I might post it to YouTube or something if we don't have time. But that's about the rivalry between two villages during the April 3rd uprising. So in 1948. Unji, feminist journalist. She's a journalist, daughter of a diver who writes for a magazine, fashion magazine in Seoul. This is about her identity complex of being a Jeju person or a Seoul person, as she says. Ji-hee, she's a Seoul city public official, granddaughter of a woman diver. She also talks about the development of Jeju and kind of her own culture clash of functioning in the big city. Ji-yeon is an activist journalist. This is a woman who returned to Jeju, I think from Iwa Women's University, and she returned to Jeju to take part and is one of the main activists against the new airport. And she came here specifically for that purpose. She returned to Jeju. Essay, grandmother.
Joey, let me interrupt. There's a lengthy question that's been typed into our chat.
Okay.
Do you mind?
Yeah, sorry, I can't see that.
Yeah, in the 1980s, I used to see Haenyeo in Busan, in Yeongdo. Would they have been local, or do Jeju Haenyeo go to work in other places? How are they organized? Are they freelancers? Do they organize to secure the best prices for their catch? Multiple part question.
Okay.
We're all waiting for the great answers.
Yeah, the women divers, yeah, they do work elsewhere. And what they do is they, together in their own village, or sometimes with, villages work together. And this is especially the younger divers who do this, who are really ambitious to make a lot of money. They hire boats themselves, and they have areas, they do go around Busan. They go to kind of islets off of Jeju and around Korea, where I don't know how they get the rights to fish in these places. This, I do not know how they do that. But they go to different places, and I believe the boat owners get 30%, I believe. I can't remember, 30 or 40%. But the take is really good on these types of trips. And they generally go for a few days or even up to a couple weeks. But these practices are changing. A lot of the women worked in Japan, and they also worked along with AMA, with the Japanese Haenyeo in their villages. And I'm not sure the technicalities of that. But yeah, they could have been Haenyeo. I thought that Busan had native Haenyeo as well. Or it would have. The majority of Koreans Haenyeo were in Jeju Island, but there's always been Haenyeo kind of in that area, I believe, in the Busan area around there. So I'm not sure. But yeah, there's standard agreements within, like I was saying, that there's kind of this anarchist vibe about the villages. There's kind of standard agreements within regions. And the price differences and that type of thing will vary. I don't know much about the price setting. I don't know much about how that's done. Yeah. So.
Okay. Thanks. Go ahead and tell us about Grandma Bondadi.
Okay, Grandma Bondari, this is an essay about a shaman. It's about a shaman's relationship with the Haenyeo, and there are a couple more village shamans here, interviews with them. This is a really important part of their culture and life. And the very last interview is with a retired diver talking about, the destruction of the shamanic shrines on the island. And the very last thing that I will leave you guys with is I will give you some quotes from the book, from the different characters from the book, and then I'll be open to whatever discussion or whatever questions that you have. Okay, so this is the first interview with a diver in her 40s, a younger diver. So at first, when I went into the water, I couldn't stay in very long, but my mother taught me the correct methods. My mother went out with me and stayed at my side. A little bit about the transmission of how to dive there. I only know diving, and it is my only job. I spent long years learning techniques and having experiences to learn what I do. I can't just get on the TV and speak about being a woman diver unless I have the experience, which means extensive experience and study. And she was kind of saying that to pit herself against the kind of women from the mainland who come to play, to take the Haenyeo diving school, and they don't really become divers. You know, obviously these local younger divers are jealous of these women coming in from Seoul and stuff like that. Most of the women who come in from Seoul don't become divers in the end anyway. So, but that's her own perspective of this. The truth is, I'm the same person in the water and out of the water. I'm just a person trying to make a living like everyone else. Don't think of me as a woman diver, think of me as a person. I heard this type of thing a lot. Since their image is being used so much every day. Okay, this is from the artist interview. There's a lot of people who take interest in what we're doing, studying and making art about mythology, about culture, but it seems like they're just interested because they want to make money off of it. So a lot of these local experts on culture and local artists, they are consulted because, you know, the owners of guest houses or someone with some type of business venture wants to use the symbology of Jeju to sell their business. And they almost always get it wrong, you know, so that's the complaint there. They went, okay, this is the Udo Island from these ladies here. They went into the cold water in every town. We managed it with our thoughts. We told ourselves, withstand this because this is how you survive. This is how we gain our living for the food we eat. You tell yourself, I have to withstand this. This is about diving before wetsuits, diving in the middle of winter before wetsuits. We don't think that we are superwomen. We think diving is our job and our duty. This is how we make a living. If you breathe underwater, that's it. If you breathe underwater, you'll die for sure. There's only one chance. If you see the person beside you in that situation, if you grab them immediately, you can save them. If you can't get to them, they won't make it. This is from this sociologist at Jeju National. I think the important thing in this situation is the objectification of people's specific spaces, their land and landscape and that kind of thing. I think Jeju's Haenyeo are a very important symptom of the tourist gaze. During the 1970s, the Haenyeo were seen as sort of an amazing phenomenon, women who worked so hard and held their breath for so long. There were many researchers who saw them as almost holy. Many of those people gave them an artificial image. There are a lot of chemicals used in the agriculture running off from the farms into the ocean. The chemicals affect the well-being of marine life. Swimming past the areas where streams meet the sea, divers can take note of this. We can't manage to make a good living. I'm telling you the truth when I say this. We are going to fight until the bitter end. Kyungran Han, Second Airport Activist Diver. Okay, and this is from the leader of the opposition, the Haenyeo opposition to the new airport, this lady. She's talking about when reporters visit to cover the Haenyeo. I like it, but when journalists report on us for their own benefit, it's not good. When they come to the village and report on our real lives and our struggles, well, more of that would be good. Oh, the women divers are UNESCO divers. Oh, the women divers of Jeju Island are strong women. Oh, look how amazing they are. I'm not interested in that sort of thing, but coming here to the village to hear of our troubles and letting the world know what's really happening with us, I support that. We're here diving and fighting the second airport in the evening after we get off from work. People need to know that. I support those who are covering that issue. But oh, boom, look at these women divers. I have contempt for that sort of thing. I don't like it. Personally, I think that Jeju Islanders and people from Seoul are very different. Jeju is a very small society, so people are very tough, and rumors make things challenging. In Seoul, you can be anonymous. Okay, so yeah, a lot of Jeju young people, they are in jail. They are in jail. You know, it's a beautiful island, but you know, not all, but some, they have their sights on other places, bigger places and bigger opportunities. I don't feel any particular strength being a woman from Jeju, but I heard about that a lot when I was young. They always said women were strong and diligent. So I have the image of strong women, but on the other hand, I think this strength they talk about can be related to patriarchy too. To me, it was so normal. I lived in the countryside and almost every old woman was diving or farming. So it wasn't special, it was just life. Jihi, Seoul public official. My grandmother was a diver. My grandfather was a PE teacher, and all my uncles on my father's side are good at swimming. It's not just from my grandmother. There are swimmers in my whole family. This lady, she was a bit of a small-time competitive swimmer, and so I asked her the question. I said, if you ever went to the Olympics, you know exactly how they would sell, you know exactly what this would be. It would be, you know, the granddaughter of the women diver is swimming in the Olympics, you know, on the national team. And she got angry. I learned from my father, not from my grandmother, you know. So yeah, yeah, it's interesting. The flip side of people who grow up in the culture. You know, this is Ji Young. She's the younger woman who returned to Jeju from Iwa to fight the airport. Activist, journalist, surfer, entrepreneur. She has a surfboard company. I was too young to understand why we had to stop surfing, but later I realized it was because of a large resort called Phoenix Island that was built. The water used to be such a brilliant emerald color, and I saw the water's color change over time. I saw it too. Little by little, I became interested in why the environment was changing for the worse in my village. I started asking myself, what can I do about this? She's talking about returning to her hometown. But there were some things that shocked me. For instance, I came home to find there was a Starbucks here. I couldn't believe it. I kept saying to myself, there are a lot of tourists here now. A lot of foreigners have come too. I had the same feeling that I had when I lost windsurfing. I felt like I'd lost my neighborhood this time. And one final quote from Young Cho Kim. He's the head shaman of Hamdak, a man in his 50s. People perform the labor themselves, but they believe the gods give them the power to do so. They believe if they pray to the shrine gods, they will never lack for food or the means to live. It's the person who does the work, but they have the gods' power to help them. People have absolute faith in this. Young Cho Kim, traditional village shaman. And this was an essay I was going to play for you, but I think I'll post it on the page maybe from YouTube. And if anyone wants to listen to it later on, they can. It's about 15 minutes long, perhaps. And this is the one about a rivalry between two villages that started during the war era, between two groups of women divers. And this was the piece of property that they were fighting over. That that's why it's called bile. This is a bile. It's a large expanse of basalt. It's kind of the working area for Jeju women divers if they're not lucky enough to have a sandy beach. So, but it also keeps you know, outsiders out of their territory because it's pretty. These things can be, you know, 3 or 4 kilometers long at times. So yeah, and here's 2 ladies going out to harvest, well, to seed sea urchins. So the plant sea urchins. Okay, and I think
Hey, we've got lots of comments, Joey, and some
okay, yeah, I'm done. So yeah, we could
let me read some of these that have been posted on the chat. James Turnbull says, I have some pictures of Pusan Haenyeo from the 1950s, so they've been around since then. Catherine Cinnamon says, yes, and in the film Village by the Sea, filmed in Pusan. Very interesting talk, thank you, beautiful. Another comment, I remember reading that Hwang Young-jo, 1992 Olympic marathon champion, was the son of a Haenyeo. Do you have any evidence that Haenyeo are genetically gifted endurance-wise?
Okay, well, interesting. I would imagine that they are, and you know, the largest body of research. Someone even told me the only the body of research which has like major significance is on the physiology of the Haenyeo. You know, yes. Of course, the successful women in the villages would have been selected over the thousands and thousands of years, where the strongest women in the ocean are the most successful, because there are classes of Haenyeo. So the way that the villages, the way that they divide, it's a little bit different in each village, but the common thing is there's an upper, middle, and lower class. And these classes are assigned different parts of the ocean. So if you kind of rank into the higher class of women divers, you're going to make a lot more money than the lower women divers. And if you meet women in a village who weren't able to dive for some reason, say they had some, so for some physical reason, years and years ago, they couldn't start diving. They're often very jealous because they weren't able to, to make the amount of money that the other women would. But yeah, that research on the physiology is full of amazing things, especially cold endurance that women divers are capable of, that other people are not. And for example, before the wetsuit, men in the village, the average amount of calories they would consume is like, 2,000 to 2,500 a day or whatever, not wartime, but in normal time. And the women would consume sometimes up to 4,000. And that's because you think about these divers that train in the water, you're burning a lot more calories. The heat is being siphoned off your body. Now, these women divers would dive up an hour or two in February, in January, in freezing water. And their breathing method has something to do with this. There's a researcher who passed away in the 80s who did that kind of research on Jeju Island, I think at somewhere in Michigan. I'm not sure, not Ann Arbor, but somewhere. His archives are there, but he has the answers to all these questions. But there's kind of in recent years, just now, there's been a revamping of interest in this kind of physiology research. But the thing is that it's a little bit too late because everybody's in a wetsuit now. So the kind of physical advantages that they had have kind of, they're different now than they were 50 years ago. But records of that exist for sure.
Brenda asks, how can we get a copy of your book and documentary on shamanism?
Okay, yeah, my book on shamanism is available on my website, which I should tell everybody. It's pagansweare.com. So pagans we are. And I write about Jeju shamanism there. And this book on women divers is on Amazon.com. If you just search my name, or if you search the title, you should be able to find it. It's an ebook right now. Corona was going on, and I wasn't sure it was ethical to even print books, to have them handled by shippers and this type of thing. So I think we're going to do an illustrated version later.
Okay. Why do you think the divers are in danger of dying out within the next decade? Can you talk for a minute about why the younger generation may be less interested in becoming divers?
Yeah, the women divers, for the most part, did not encourage their children to become divers. And, you know, the people who are in their 40s and down now were not encouraged to become divers. Yeah, the new opportunities had opened up for people on Jeju. You know, the economy had diversified. Tourism had come to the island. There was, you know, the option. Tangerines came to Jeju, and you know, there was just in the 80s there were a lot more money shifted to farming. You know, I think in the late 70s, something like 30% of all women divers quit the same year to take on tangerine farming, to shift to that. So the economy shifted, and they didn't really encourage their children to be divers. Now they're encouraged. You know, diving is promoted for tourism or for more like you know, as cultural heritage, I would say. But all of these women I'm interviewing are still, you know, that's their mainstay. They're still making money. That's still their main income, is diving.
Joey, James Turnbull uploaded a file of a scientific study done about the Haenyeo and physiology and all of that. And I've sent that to everyone on chat. It's a PDF that you can download. So you may be interested in that science of the physiology of the Haenyeo, everybody.
Thank you, James, and hello, James. I've spoke with James long ago through email, I think.
Okay, does anybody else have any questions besides what we've done so far? Okay, I think we've covered it. Joey, thank you. Very interesting, and certainly a lot of insight into that culture of Jeju Island. I've been in Korea since 1975, and I've been to Jeju-do several times, and I knew about the Haenyeo, but I learned a lot tonight. So thanks very much. We appreciate your joining us. Be sure to join us next Tuesday, July 14th, for our next lecture. We'll have a presentation about Cuban Koreans. See our Facebook page or the website for some more information. By the way, we have a new website up, but we're still working out the kinks, so be patient with us. It's the same address, raskb.com. And thank you all for joining us, and have a good evening. Bye now.
Thank you, everybody.